Out of all Wes Anderson's large body of work, his most apparent film out of his filmography is easily The Royal Tenenbaums. Compared with Anderson's other works, this film ends up being his most unpredictable. What Royal Tenenbaums aims to be in the long term is a biting look at the destructive tendencies of family dysfunction and the emotional consequences of the truth. As it turns out, the Royal Tenenbaums, unlike the Tenenbaum children, only improves with age. It's looking more and more like Wes Anderson's indisputable masterpiece. Royal and Etheline had 3 children, all of whom were so accomplished while still in grade school that they were the subject of books, including one by their mother. Margot was a playwright, Richie was a tennis champion, and Chaz was a financial wizard. But as adults, they have reverted to childhood and either can't or won't perform anymore. One by one, they return home, moving into their old bedrooms. And then Royal, long estranged from the family, tells Etheline that he too wants to come home, to make his peace with the family before he dies of cancer. The movie might seem quirky or silly from the outside, but if you take a closer look, it deals with a lot of serious topics that include a graphic and a bloody suicide attempt, sexual references and situations, and painful issues of betrayal and deception. An adopted child is made to feel like an outsider. A character has a serious drug abuse problem. Some people might find the light-hearted treatment of these issues offensive and may miss the dry humor completely. In this quirky story about a wildly dysfunctional family, The Royal Tenenbaums takes place in a whacked-out fantasy version of Baltimore, where hotels employ uniformed elevator operators. Decrepit taxis, literally labeled gypsy cab, show up whenever someone needs to go somewhere, and there is a YMCA on 375th Street. The production design is brilliant, and it invites you to the wonderful world of the Tenenbaums. Anthony Brandt once wrote, "The most powerful ties are the ones to the people who gave us birth. It hardly seems to matter how many years have passed, how many tragedies there may have been, how much misery in the family. We remain connected, even against our wills." Royal, a former litigator who was brought down years ago by Chaz and sent to prison, suddenly wants to reconnect with his family. He comes up with an outrageous scheme of faking illness after he's kicked out of the hotel where he has been living. However, his children don't buy his change of heart towards them after 17 years of indifference. Margot, who's married to a writer and neurologist, Raleigh St. Clair, can't forgive Royal for never letting her forget that she was adopted. Whereas Chaz is clearly a very short fuse, Margot is the epitome of apathy. She is the object of the affections of Eli, Richie, and Raleigh St. Clair. She doesn't actually love any of them, except Richie, and also has only 9 fingers because of an unfortunate accident. Her character is probably the least developed. However, it is interesting to observe the titles of the plays she is pictured constantly reading, and notice how her fashion sense is exactly the same from childhood to adulthood. Emotionally scarred and naturally bitter, she starts smoking at age 12 and begins writing plays that reflect her worldview. Obviously, they're not very joyful, but they do get her noticed at a young age. However, writer's block has set in, and she spends her days locked in the bathroom, avoiding contact with her therapist/husband. There's something willowy and almost unhuman in a sense about Margot. Paltrow holds on to the melancholic expressions from her eyes. It's as if it's flashing out a character who denies her own happiness, which is sad no matter what quirky spin Anderson puts on her character. Chaz desperately tries to keep him away from the 2 sons he's raising alone since the death of his wife. Royal secretly gets through to the kids by taking them on several prankster adventures. Aside from disliking his father, is paranoid because his wife died in a plane crash, and keeps himself and his sons in red jumpsuits so he can keep track of them more easily. Royal clearly favored Richie over Chaz when they were young, and even shot Chaz with a pellet gun when they were on the same team, which founded Chaz's deep antagonism towards his father. However, Royal eventually does make amends with Chaz, Richie is the only one who seems to have any feelings of closeness for his dad, even though the former tennis star is still struggling with the love he secretly harbors for his adopted sister. When Richie finds out that she had an affair with Eli Cash, the Tenenbaum's next-door neighbor, who is now a novelist and a drug addict, he tries to commit suicide. I think a good example of the way the movie balances comedy and the theme of depression is in how, upon returning from New York, Richie just immediately forgives the entire family. He unsuccessfully tries to heal the rift with Chaz and Royal, and when Royal tells the kids of his illness, it's clear Richie has already welcomed him back into the fold, and that's quite sad. Richie is too accommodating. He even tells Royal that he understands him leaving after his tennis career flamed out because Royal's never been good with disappointment. He wants reconciliation so much that he's willing to overlook some obviously awful treatment. When he finally comes to see his best friend and sister for who they really are, his suicide attempt is pretty much him taking everything out on himself rather than confronting others. But by the end, Richie's forgiving nature becomes a saving grace. It's maybe the only real way for this family to move past the trauma. There's a problem with indie films overloading on backstory, but The Royal Tenenbaums, to me, is an example of how to fill in meaningful details about characters without treating those details like little secrets that explain everything. Anderson shows the past casting a shadow over the present by beginning the movie with an extended flashback and then dropping in little memories throughout the film. But the flashbacks are entertaining alone, and the Tenenbaums family's old business doesn't prevent them from moving forward. Having established what the Tenenbaums have been through, Anderson then keeps referring back to their history and how the characters comport themselves without needing to keep underlining what it all means. Royal's monumental insensitivity to his children, the way Chaz's sons are always accompanied by their dog Buckley, Eli Cash's phony machismo, these are all fine shading to what's already been established. But in The Royal Tenenbaums, the subject of family, what defines it and what keeps it together, and what might make it break, is pretty much the whole movie. The title is significant. This is the story of a father who seemingly made too many mistakes to redeem himself, but who attempts to do so anyway, and without getting too psychological about it, the film pins many of the Tenenbaums' problems on Royal's neglect. The kid sprouted but never flourished because he failed his job. Yet for all the strain this has placed on the Tenenbaums as a family, they remain a family. The title The Royal Tenenbaums seems fitting as well, in that Royal's fatal flaw is his narcissism and his inability to see his children and wife as anything more than an extension of himself. So his struggle and his journey over the course of the film is to value his family as individuals whom he's deeply hurt, rather than extensions of his own glory, and that requires embracing vulnerability and humility, which are utterly foreign to him. He isn't just learning to be a father, he is learning to be a decent human being. However, are we putting too much on Royal here as the catalyst for the family's decline? In terms of the children's achievements, Royal's departure does nothing to stop them from succeeding. After he announces the separation, Chaz, Richie, and Margot still thrive in their individual disciplines, and it isn't until later that the Tenenbaums fall off the ledge. Royal's greatest sin in this regard is not being there when they fell. We can see that Richie's meltdown is motivated by Margot marrying Raleigh, but we also learn later that Royal disappeared from Richie's life after the match. I'd say their failures are all but inevitable, but Royal left them that much more emotionally ill-equipped to deal with the aftermath. I think this goes back to what I was saying earlier about the Tenenbaums being blocked at every turn by their own memorabilia. The past just weighs on these people, pinning them down, keeping them from moving. The Royal Tenenbaums relies heavily on imagery that carries strong impressions of childhood. The Tenenbaum children's bedrooms are filled with toys, games, drawings, and outdated technology, preserved from when they moved out, like miniature museums of a more carefree life. I've often felt like Anderson's characters are essentially children's book heroes who grew up and are now in a universe very different from the one which they once thrived. They're still wearing their old uniforms and carrying that same old baggage, all of which has made them ill-prepared to coexist with actual adults. Are they any better prepared after the film ends? I find the end of the Royal Tenenbaums satisfying. Everyone seems less tortured than before. Margot, for instance, writes another play, but it gets mixed reviews. And that seems to be pretty much where everyone else is with their lives. They haven't triumphed, just carried on. Anderson does that quite a bit. Those happy endings that still feel a little downbeat. It's been 20 years now since this film was made, and this is still the go-to cool film for a generation of kids in search of indie cred. The soundtrack expresses the teen years for smart yet misunderstood teens, and Margot Tenenbaum remains a can't-fail Halloween costume. It's a key cultural touchstone for offbeat young people. I think that my favorite aspect of the Royal Tenenbaums is the way in which the costuming is especially relevant throughout the entire film, more so than any other Anderson flick. Each of the Tenenbaum children's costumes are meant to encapsulate the moments in which they peaked during childhood. These costumes eventually become shields from the world in an effort to cope with their dissatisfaction with their present selves. Margot's coat shrouds her tiny body, as well as her packs of cigarettes. Richie wears sunglasses and a full beard to produce a layer between him and the world. That is, until he shaves before his suicide attempt and admits his love to Margot, and therefore allowing himself to become vulnerable. As for Chaz, his matching outfits with Ari and Uzi exerts his authority over the two children and his attempt to hang on to the purest memory of his wife that remains. The movie's obsessive accumulation of introductions is a gorgeous, almost spiritual mirror to the Tenenbaums' own experience. Wes Anderson understands, as too few modern directors do, that several shots can sometimes give you more information about a single character than a close-up of that same character can. You need to see how they fit into the world they live in. Margot internalizes her otherness as an adopted child, and this movie beautifully finds its way into this girl's notoriously secretive headspace. This view of Margot apart from her family is repeated in the hospital scene, where she leans against the door while the other characters huddle near Richie's bed, bombarding him with questions about his suicide attempt. Margot is further away from Richie than anyone in the room, but she's the closest to him. They're just going to have to be secretly in love with each other and leave it at that. This movie is undoubtedly one of Anderson's most successful aesthetic executions, with every component bearing an incredible amount of meaning to both the audience and his characters. Director Wes Anderson and actor Owen Wilson, who plays the Tenenbaums' neighbor Eli, wrote the screenplay, and like their previous collaborations in Bottle Rocket and Rushmore, this movie defies categorization, combining elements of satire, fantasy, comedy, tragedy, and drama. That's a combination that will make some audiences uncomfortable, but will seem to others to be the best possible way, maybe the only way, to truly convey a story of family conflict. The result is messy, even outrageous, but reflecting a singularity of vision that is welcomed in a mainstream studio film starring 3 Oscar winners. In some ways, The Royal Tenenbaums acts as a polar opposite to Rushmore, which is a coming-of-age tale. Tenenbaums is more focused on aging, and in particular, the fragility of Royal. It's a fairy tale set in reality, a collection of stories depicting both the fragility and the resilience of the human condition, while keeping the audience entertained. No Wes Anderson film would be complete without a stylish eye for framing, camera movement, and set design. The Tenenbaum house, filled with soft pastels and rich woods, arguably a visual competition between the feminine and the masculine parental influences of Etheline and Royal respectively. It serves as a shield from the New York streets we see beyond the house, filled with trash bags and graffiti. The house is so comparatively grand and safe that it is no wonder the Tenenbaum children are so keen to return, despite the difficult circumstances they have faced there in the past. The artifacts of the children's past that we see, such as their unchanged bedrooms or hand-painted art on the walls, reflect the state of arrested development they have been left in. Only once Royal returns to their lives to fix his past mistakes can they begin to truly develop and grow out of their childhood identities.